Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation, and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role, and voice of professional translators. Thank you, Amalie, for taking the time to come and talk to us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Amalie. Amalie Foss is a veteran freelance translator and copywriter specialized in audiovisual translation. She studied at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts Conservation School. She co-founded 12 years ago Medietext Denmark, a cooperative that produces, translates, proofreads, and edits text in all languages. And as they say in their website, for discerning and quality-conscious customers. She also works as a news subtitler at TV2, which is Denmark's second national public service broadcaster. She has overall 35 years experience in the field. And she is also the president of the Audiovisual Translators Europe, which is the European Federation of National Associations and Organizations for Media Translator. And if all this was not enough, she is also the chair of the AV group of translators within the Danish Union of Journalists. She works mainly from English, Swedish, and Norwegian into Danish, but also into these other languages. So, Amalie, or should I say Madam President? I always wanted to interview our president.
Actually, when we started the AVTE, the Audiovisual Translators Europe, I said the person in charge of this is not going to be a chair. That's a ridiculous word. So I'm going to go for president. I mean, in Scandinavia, you have to join a motorbike gang in order to become president of something. So
okay,
I couldn't resist it.
Okay, great. So you studied conservation of texts. So I was curious to know, how did you become a translator?
Well, I've always had I've been reasonably good at languages, but it was kind of not, that was just, within my family, that was just something you were. They all had a pretty good understanding of languages, and this was just something you could do, and then you would do something real with your working life, with your career. So it was just assumed that languages, that was something you had, and then your work could be something else. So, which is ridiculous. It's not like it's fancier to do something that you don't have a talent for than it is to do something you have a talent for. But so I did a different training, which I hope I also had a talent for. I really liked it, but I was sick of it at the end. It's a very small world. Let's just leave it at that. And then somebody said, this subtitling company, they're looking for people because the market had opened up after 88, I think, 1988. God, that's a long time ago. So the market had opened up, and all kinds of private things or stations and so on coming in. And they said, do you want to try this? And I said, sure. Then I got stuck doing that. I really, really like it.
So maybe it would be good at this point to explain, in this series of podcasts, we have interviewed several AVT translators, and I always ask them to explain what they do for the general public. So what is it that you do?
Well, I get the material, like I get the video file, it's called, or whatever it is. Let's call it the video file. I get the material and then I translate it. And subtitling, I do subtitling, very little other AV translation, although there's lots of it. You create the subtitles and there's God, it's so difficult to explain. It's just something I do. But there's a timer in your video file, and it counts hours, minutes, seconds, and then frames within the seconds. 24 frames per second for feature films, 25 for TV, and then there's new formats and so on. And then you time your translation, and that people have to have enough time to read it without being distracted from the visual material. They're watching something, it's visual. It's a visual work, whatever it is. Whatever people say, the dialogue has to be translated and sometimes signs and so on. But that has to be translated. But people have to not be distracted from the visual part of. So there is reading speed, and that is incredibly important, because if you just put verbatim, right, everything that's being said and it races across the screen, you're either, if you're a speed reader, you're reading and then you're not watching. So that defeats the purpose. Or you're not reading and not watching because it's just too fast, but it's very distracting with these subtitles racing across the screen. So this is why reading speed is so important. And it's not this, no, it's not the reading speed you have when you read a book. It's a different reading speed. For that to happen, you have to condense. So the amount of editing you do is insane, because you have to think, you have to pass on the original message in the target language, and you have to edit it down. You have to compress and condense so that people can read it while they're still watching, and they don't have this sense that they're reading. They have the sense that they're watching. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I was going to ask you then, do you think this condensation, which is one of the strategies, is this the most difficult aspect of translating subtitles, do you think?
Absolutely. It is the important factor that makes subtitling successful or poor quality. Good quality, bad quality. And it is the most difficult thing to grasp. And it's the sort of frustration factor is very high. So for some translators, it's like, I don't want to do subtitling. It just doesn't work for them, because it is the art of the possible. You have to do what makes it work. You have to deliver the original message, but it has to go through this sort of funnel. I don't know if that's the right image, because you don't take off that much. But sometimes you have to. If you're translating a screwball comedy, you're just crying all the way through. You're weeping. But at the end, it works. And people are grasping the jokes, and it works. And you think, I have conquered. So in that sense, it's the same as being a copywriter working in advertising, or being a journalist, or being an anything. It's you're given a space, and it's smaller than yourself. And the job description is do a somersault within this space that is smaller than yourself. You have to do a somersault. Does that make any sense?
Yes, total sense. At least to me it does. So this is very related to constraints are very related to creation. A lot of artists use constraints to create art or to create poetry.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you how would you define creativity in subtitling?
It's like you declare your loyalty to this work, whatever it is, whether it's high art or just a piece of an interview with a bike rider, before day 7 of a bike race, or, desperate people in a news segment, or reality TV. It can be anything, but let's say it's a work that somebody's done, and you declare your loyalty to this work, and you carry through that message to the viewer in the target language. And that is a very narrow stratum. Is that the word? It's a very narrow space, like I said before.
Yeah.
And the creativity is thinking, how do I transform this? You have to transform it to the target language, and then you have to, and it all has to be there. And I think a lot of translators don't maybe realize that they're being creative until after they've done it. And I can't, because I don't have any formal language training at all. So, and the way I work, the way I learn things is intuitive, which is infuriating or just really frustrating for people who are trying to teach me something. So I find it a little difficult to describe, but that's the best thing I can do, is that I'm given this thing, this message, a scroll, a rock with something inscribed on it. I have to carry it to the people who need it.
Yeah. Well, intuition and transformation are essential parts of creativity, at least in the theory of creativity. But in all these years of doing audiovisual work, what is the series, film, or piece of subtitling that you have enjoyed the most, and why?
Well, it depends so much, because I've been fortunate to do all kinds of subtitling for all kinds of things, for art, for for enjoyment, for news, for reality TV, for whatever. So some of it can be very trivial and some of it can be like this sort of super sort of cultural experience, but the process is the same. So it is very difficult for me to say what has been my favorite. When I was given the film Gilda to translate many, many, many years ago, I was so happy. It was, it's one of the best movies ever made. And just working with that material was just such a joy. But when I get a little clip for the news and a reporter is out somewhere and he's trying to make sense of what's going on, he's interviewing people and so on, it can be tragic or it can be, whatever it is, and I get the message through, then I'm very happy. Or the sports reporter is joking with the athletes, and I can make that come through in the subtitles so that you get the same chuckle that the reporter wanted.
Yeah.
From English into Danish, then I'm also very happy. So it is really difficult to say what stands out.
But do you think the creative process, for example, in these examples that you have given us, Gilda or piece of news, do you think the creative process is different, or did you approach the work differently? Say, for example, watch the movie first, which is something you might not be able to do with the news. Was there any difference?
Well, I think watching the material first is more like the way I was trained by my colleagues and by whatever boss was around. That's something you do at the start, because otherwise it's too fragmented. You watch the entire movie, or you watch the 30 minutes of sitcom, or you watch whatever it is, and then you get started. But as you gain experience, you just throw yourself into it from the very beginning. And you start creating the subtitles as you go along, because if you've misunderstood something, you go back and correct it. So that, for me, that's more a question of inexperienced or experience. And that may not be the case. It depends how you work. For me and my colleagues, that was how it was.
And do you think that now you spend more time in the reviewing phase than before?
No, it's not that systematic. I don't think it's back and forth. You think, can I just say that technically you allow yourself a faster reading speed for the news, slightly faster reading speed for the news, because the assumption is that people are more focused on it. The viewers will be more focused on it. But it's not a massive difference, got to say. We are still super strict about reading speeds. But the news clips will also be edited very often like 1980s MTV, you get the punchline at the very end and there's a second. They say 3 words at the end. It's 1 second. You have a second for it. And you have to do the best you can and it's usually different with different kinds of material. So there's technical differences, but I would say the basic approach is the same. You have to be more careful of factual things in news and less careful of them in fiction, for instance, because you're trying to convey the idea, the tone, the equivalence in your own language. So you have a little more freedom. But no, I would say it's the same. I'm not sure I'm right, but that's what I say.
Maybe everyone does it differently as well, as you said before. So I wanted to ask you something. Of course, this project, the Incorrect project that the podcast series is part of, we deal with translation, creativity, technology. So we need to talk about the elephant in the room. And now I'm going to address Madam President, because the European Association that you are president of has released, together also the Spanish Association and the French Association have released a series of manifestos about machine translation.
Yes.
So I wanted to know the associations and your personal perspective on machine translation and its usage in audiovisual translation.
Well, at the moment, it's a negative impact, I think, because it does not do the job as well as a human being can do it, in nowhere near And instead of augmenting the translator's work, augmenting me, it diminishes me and it diminishes my colleagues. I mean, fortunately, I'm not saddled with it in my everyday work, unlike a lot of my colleagues. But instead, there's a large ideological component in this. And that is what's happening to so many people in so many fields is like, how do we replace human beings with technology? And of all the fields that are not suitable for this, AV translation is probably the least suitable field that I can think of because it's human speech. And whether that is scripted or in real time, non-scripted, it is always unpredictable. And there is no way that, well, there might be some way if we waste an incredible amount of money and time on it in the future that a large language model or a machine translation program could catch all these nuances and what they would mean in another language. And then that's one thing. Human speech, unpredictable. I mean, comes far ahead of the weather. I mean, the weather is far more predictable than human speech. And then there's the visual side, which the speech is connected to. It's the context of what's being said, of the dialogue, of the speech, is the visual side, because it's audiovisual translation. And it's just a complete... Well, so far, let me put this in as constructively as I can. So far, I haven't seen anything that enhances quality. What I have seen is attempts to move the translator from translating into editing, which is a very fancy word for cleaning up after a translation program. And the whole point of that exercise is to eliminate the human element, the human translator, because editors are cheaper. Certainly, if you say they're cheaper, they're cheaper. And this effort directs also to influences research a lot. So they're starting at the wrong end. Instead of saying, how can we improve translators? How can we improve things for humans? They're saying, how can we remove the humans? And so far, it lowers quality. There's no two ways about it. And I'm not a fan.
And do you think that, like you said, it's not augmenting the translator? So if you had a magic wand and could create a technology, in the case that you could and you had all this knowledge, what would be the technology that you would create for subtitlers?
I would create the technology that would help me see if I'm on track, and that would get me the words and the facts that I needed very, very quickly, even more quickly than now.
In the source text, you mean, almost?
There's the source text, but also, might be helpful to some people, prompts or questions. Do you want to go this way? Do you want to go that way? If you incorporate dictionaries and all kinds of dictionaries, fact-finding, incorporate that into the translation program. Some translation programs already do this, so that everything, the minute I write a word, it comes up. Here's a possibility. Here's another possibility. You can do this. You can do that. Other people might prefer not to have that at all. It's very individual. What you have to do is that you have to create something that starts with the translator. What do you need in order to improve your work and to make it faster or whatever? What do you need for that to happen? And then,
without losing the creative or qualitative aspect, right?
So far, there is you cannot replace a human being if you want to retain the quality. And then the work that's being done, again, we're talking ideology again, is saying, no, that's fine. You can drive a Rolls Royce, but you can also drive a Volkswagen, So there's this, that's a thing I've heard a lot, this idea that good quality is some form of luxury. And it really isn't. It's essential. It is absolutely essential.
Yeah, well, this is what I was going to ask you, because a lot of these streaming companies are obviously using machine translation and post editing, and they are open about it, like Netflix. So, do you think the reading experience of this audience or these viewers is different?
Yes, I think
Or
it's
will they
different.
get used to this type of quality and then don't know what is the other type of more enhanced subtitling?
I think you can get people used to anything. You can get people used to starving. You can get people used to, you can get people used to terrible conditions on so many levels. But if you talk to audiences from countries that have some kind of tradition for subtitling, they have all noticed that the subtitles are not that great. I'm not saying that subtitlers working for the streaming services are necessarily terrible. They're not paid very well. If you're not paid some of them are paid very, very poorly. If you're paid very well or adequately, I don't think that many of us are paid very well, but if you're paid adequately, you have the time to do a good job. If you're not, you don't. That part of it is very, very simple. So the thing about the streaming services is that they are consistently trying to get around. How do we get around this human element and these people who require pay, and sometimes you even have to talk to them, and you have to teach them things, and this is things that streaming services don't, or certainly didn't know themselves, training and so on. So, and in their defense, they did have large amounts of material that they discovered when they were creating the streaming services would need translations in order for people in other countries to understand them, cumbersome. But they did, so they had to sort of do something about that. And that's a whole other interview if you want to talk about streaming services. But the attitude has always been, oh God, all these foreign languages. They will say that it hasn't been, but it has. And it's a whole nother story.
So I am aware of the time, and I wanted to close with this question that I ask our interviewees. If machine translation replaces professionals, as sometimes the media claims, what would a world without translators look like, in your opinion?
It would look much less transparent but it would be connected with all the other things that would be much less transparent when the human element disappeared. The thing about AI is that it invents things. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yeah, the famous hallucinations. Yeah.
Yeah. And I experienced that when I put something in Farsi to English through an internal thing, that just to see where was I? And it put something in about a suicide. Somebody had committed suicide. Nobody had committed suicide. It wasn't mentioned. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't part of what was discussed in this news interview. I find that terrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying. And this is what I think I think it would be much less transparent and therefore very, very dangerous. I think that there is AI and it will be used for translation, and we have to develop something that starts with us, that doesn't finish us, but starts with us. And we have to do that soon. So that would, for all the academics who want to research that, they would be on the side of the angels, I think. And if you go to the AVT website, you can also see our manifesto on machine translation. It's all there.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are people in NLP working with translators or with the human component rather than replacing them. But thank you very much, Amalie. I know you are very busy, so I don't want to take more time from you. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you again to our invited speaker, and to our listeners. Thank you for being there, and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.